Hello, welcome back. Today's gonna be interesting. We will be speed running a lot of these things, so buckle up. All right. So let's do this. So I already have loaded up um, the VS Code. We have our login page. Got the username, password. Hit login. Nothing happens. Go to sign up. We go to our sign up page. Type in our put a new email, username, a password. You can hit sign up. We need to update this because we need a first name and we need a last name. So let's go ahead and update that first real quick. So we're going to go to sign up. I'm going to close this. And then we just need to make a bunch more of these. So I'm going to full screen this for now. And then I'm just going to take this. That's first name, and that's a last name. Last name. So, well, I should probably, there you go. First name. Okay, that should be fine. Save. Okay, that looks terrible. So we gotta fix that. Let's change the height. Let me see what happens if I were to remove it. What would happen? Okay, cool. And then I can add a, do I have a, no, I do not. Okay, so I'll add some padding to give it that roundedness. So we'll do 8 of 8. There we go. That looks very clean. All right, so we have an email, and then email, text, password. Beautiful. Okay, and there it is. And then we can go back to login. We have that. Go to sign up. Beautiful. Okay, so here we can type in our email, our username. I feel like the username should go first. That seems to be like the way most websites work. And in fact, I will push the email down. And then I will push the username down. So we have first name, last name, username, email, password. I think this is how most websites have it. So this is what we'll do. Okay, cool. And then we're done there. Nice. However, we need to send the data to our backend. So now we got to open up our backend. Okay. I need to run example because all my data is going to be in MySQL. My squirrel. Well, not squirrel, but. All right, cool. So I'm going to minimize that. Okay. Hopefully, fingers crossed, it's running. Beautiful. So what I want to accomplish today is to have the ability to sign up from my front-end portal here. I want to be able to create a user, and then I'm going to try and check to see, okay, can I then sign in? Okay. So that's going to be the objective for today, is to sign up and then try to log in. Okay. So the thing is, we have a backend, correct? We have a backend. The problem is that the backend is abstract. It has no idea it's going to be hooked into a front end, right? It just has like some APIs, and it has some like restrictions, like, hey, send me JSON. I'm going to send you back some JSON, and then send me this type of data, and that's really it. That's all we have. That's all it is. So our backend has no idea about the front end. However, our front end needs to know about our back end. Not in its entirety. It just needs to know the API, and that's it. Okay. So in our front end, we're going to build a web API to basically interface with our back end, using these web URLs, because that's how we're going to talk to our back end. It's just using straight up web, specifically, HTTP. Okay. So we got the build app. Okay. So we're going to create a folder here. We're going to call these, web APIs. If you're going to have more than one, So here we're going to call this the bidder dash API JS. Did I spell that? I didn't spell that right. Bidder. Okay. Okay. So we're almost done. So what we need to do is talk to our backend. So we're going to create a class. Okay. And this class is just going to be called bidder API. That's it. That's what we're going to call it. And then, so remember, Node.js uses node requires. I think that's coming from something called common.js or whatever. But we're using ES6, so we can have imports. So our modules, the way we bring in modules and the way we export our modules is different. Okay, so in Node, you would say something like module dot exports, and then you would export, whatever, either as an object, like either you could do that, right? This is how you would do it in Node.js. Or if you had more than one thing, you could bring it in as an object and then export out the entire object and then destructure the things that you want. Okay, it's just a regular old JavaScript object. It's nothing crazy. But because we're using ES6 imports, all right, because that's what kind of like React kind of wants you to use, though I think it also supports requires with some asterisks there. So all we have to do is say export default, like that. Export default bidder API. Okay. And so now our class is now available to the outside world, because once you start talking about modules, remember, everything that's inside of your file is going to be encapsulated and stuck in that file. We're going to have to manually export every little piece. And if you have more than one thing to export out, that's totally fine. All you have to do is just say export on it, but you won't be able to say default on it. So default has some restrictions, okay? We'll go over more about that. Right now, we'll just focus on this bidder API. Okay, so we're just gonna have a constructor here that does nothing. Okay. Actually, we can use this to initialize some of our stuff. So what we need is we need to be able to hit our endpoint. So we need an endpoint. So we're gonna say something like this dot what is it? Yeah, we'll say host. Okay, and this is going to be HTTP / localhost : 5050. That's where our backend is running on port 5050. And again, this right here is just localhost because I'm running it on my machine. If you were running it on, like, let's say on AWS, for example, then you would need to point to AWS. So you would be like HTTPS : / ec2.amazon or AWS, blah 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 blah, and then whatever port they're using, whatever port actually that you're have it on. Okay, and that's it. Now, this host thingy, this property, is going to be exposed to the outside world, and so you can actually update it. For example, like let's say I create a instance here, new bidder API. If I say instance dot, I can see host. I can set it to, like, let's say undefined. So we want to kind of prevent this. Now, again, in JavaScript, there's nothing stopping you from doing stuff like this, even if I try to like hide it. Okay, so take that with a grain of salt. So again, this is what I always like to do. When something needs to be private, I just annotate it as private using the JS docs. Now, when people start using my instance, you can see that there is no more the .host, right? Because these are supposed to be fields, okay? This is similar to, like, in Java, you wouldn't want everything to be public. You would want certain fields to be private so that objects that are using your class cannot update those fields directly, or else you're going to have undefined behavior. So that's kind of what I'm trying to get at with this host. So I don't want an outside class to change the host. Okay. All right. Now, ideally there would only ever be one, right? There would only ever be one bitter API. So I'm going to say instance equal to new bitter API. I'm going to say export default. I believe I can do this. Yes. So this bitter API is going to be, or can I just say this? I should be able to say that, right? Yes. I have to remember this. I'm used to doing things a little bit different. Okay. So that should work. Okay. So basically, I'm basically making a singleton. There can only be one bitter API, right? That's basically what I'm trying to do. I only want one to ever exist ever. Okay. So now that I have that, now I just have to write out all of my endpoints here. So basically my routes. So I have the /users route. Okay. So let's start building these one at a time. So under my bitter API, maybe I should have another class called users API. I'll have another one. Constructor. This will be the host. This dot host is equal to host. And again, just get used to using JS doc whenever you can. So you can type things. So this host is supposed to be a string. And then our host is also going to be a string. And again, we want to mark this as private for now. And I forgot to annotate this one for its type. There we go. Cool. Okay, so we have this users API. Good. Now, the reason why I'm separating this out a little bit is because I don't want to have a bunch of methods on my bitter API. I want to be able to separate out, right? So if I need a developer to work on the users API, I don't have to worry about them, you know, messing things up. In fact, it would probably be a better idea if I create a folder here called bitter API, and then I move this into here. Move. Yep. And then I create another folder called, or another file called bitter -users -API. Okay. And then I move this into here, this definition. And then I do a export default users API. Okay, just like that. Okay. Then up here, I'm going to import it. I'm going to say import users API, and it's coming from this /, meaning in our current directory, look for the file bitter users API. So notice how it was smart enough to actually pick it up. Okay, cool. So from there, I'm going to create a users API equal to new. Whoops, what did I do? Okay, new users API. This one's expecting the host, so I'll pass in the host. Now the reason why I'm doing it this way, where even though the host is declared here, I could just write it in every single one, is like, what if in the near future we change this, right? We change it. If I hard code the URL into every single file, then I have to go into every single file and modify it. Versus in the future, you know, if we were to put this somewhere else, it'd be as easy as just changing, you know, this line right here, and it's going to propagate everywhere. So you want to minimize the amount of places where you're going to have to hard code something. It's going to happen. You're going to have to do it at some point. It's impossible for you to like not hard code some value somewhere. Okay. But if you are going to have to do it smartly. Do it at the most upper level as you can, so that should the future ever cause you to have to change it, you all have to change it in like a couple places. I literally mean like 1 or 2 places. Not, oh, let me open all 10 of these files and modify it. If you ever run into a situation like that, you're engineering it wrong. Just straight up, you're doing it wrong, right? Okay. So my users API only has one requirement, and that's that I pass in the host because it's going to need it. Okay, cool. And again, I'm going to annotate this type as the users API, and I want to make this private. Okay, cool. So, but I do want, if you're using my instance, I want you to say instance dot and then say something like users dot create, and then you pass me the data. See, that's how I want my, this is how I want my API to be used, okay? So how can I accomplish that? Well, you just create a method, create a getter for this private thing that you have here. Okay, so I'm just call it users, because that's my users, basically the user scope. Okay, now all I'm gonna do here is just say return this dot users API. That's it. Okay, see, notice how JavaScript was able to pick up that I'm returning a users API. Great, so now in my instance, I can say something like instance dot, there's my users, that's a method, and I can say dot, and then in the future, I will have my methods there for how to interact with the user scope. Okay. Okay, cool. So let me go back to this users, and let me finish this up. So the first thing we want to do, let's start with the easy stuff. Let's start with the easy stuff. Let's try and hit this endpoint. So when you hit the home, when you hit home of /users, you're going to get all the users. So let's try and build that. So we'll call this all. Okay. And it takes no arguments because you're going to get all of them, right? That's kind of like the whole point here. You're going to get all the users. Again, this is terrible. Don't ever do this, especially if you have a really good website and you have a bunch of users. Don't ever have an API that exposes all the users like that. Don't ever do that. You can have an internal API, sure, but never expose it to the public. Don't ever do that, okay? Okay, so here we have this. So all we need to do now is create a fetch to do a request to grab the data. Okay, so that's all we have to do now. So we're going to use fetch. So we can use fetch. Okay, fetch takes in an input, which is going to be the URL. Okay, which is why we need the host. So this is how we're going to do it. So we're going to use the string literals here. So I will put that in the background, and let me maximize this. Okay, so I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger. There you go. Hopefully you guys can see. Let me know if you guys can't ever see, and I'll make it bigger or whatever. Okay, so here I'm going to create these dynamically. So I'm gonna use my backticks that I'm gonna inject. Okay, I'm gonna inject the host because that's the first thing we need is the host. Okay, so just to preface this, the way you need to do this is you need to have your host, okay, / and then your resource path, right? Whatever it is you're trying to hit. We usually call these the resource paths. There's a term for that. It's called an endpoint. Okay. So the endpoint here we're trying to hit is /users. That's our endpoint, /users. That's what we're trying to hit. Okay. The host could be anything, right? Like who gives a shit, right? As long as you have /users, I don't care if it's on AWS. I don't care if it's on Netlify. I don't care if it's coming from your Raspberry Pi and all you have is an IP address. As long as it's /users, that's all I really care about here, right? That's all I care. So notice I really don't care where the host is coming from. It could be anything, right? Okay, so once we have that's it. That's what we need. We need to give it some parameters. No, actually, this should be it. This is really, because this is very simple. Because if you remember in our backend, we're not taking any, like you can see even the request object is not even being used. You can see it's grayed out. Like all we need to do is like hit this and then that's it. Now, if you hover over fetch, you'll notice that fetch actually returns a promise. Okay, so fetch is going to return a promise when you execute it, because remember, fetch is a function. It even says right there, it's a function. It's a function called fetch, and it has a couple of overrides that you can use. But anyways, when you execute this function, fetch, you're going to get back a promise, which is why we can chain the then, okay? But remember, we don't want to be doing that. We want to be fancy, so we want to await it, okay? So we need to mark this as async, okay? So now I can say const response. So fetch is going to give me back a response object. So when you're dealing with promises, okay, if you want to wait for the thing to resolve, all you have to do is say await, await this promise. And if you hover over response now, it's a type of response because that's the thing that fetch is going to return. If I remove the await, fetch is just going to return the promise object. If I hover this response, it's a promise, right? So you want to make sure you await it here. Now the other option, again, just again, so we can review some of this promises stuff. You can call this, you know, I don't know, fetch promise equals, and then, you know, if you want to write more code, which, you know, I don't recommend. Okay, you could do this. This is another option, right? Because remember, fetch promise is a variable that holds a promise type, and so when you await it, you're going to get back the response. Instead of doing it that long-winded way, just say response here and then just call await there. Done. Cool. So at this point we have our response. Now we know that in our API we're going to get JSON. Okay, so I need to grab that. So I can say await. So all these types of operations that you can do on the response, they're all going to be, like you see right here, look on the left. If I want to get the body as JSON, it's going to return me a promise. If I want to get the body as text, it's going to return me a promise. Okay, there's the blob, there's your promise. Okay, so that being said, if I want to get the body as JSON, then I need to await it. That's just the way that the response API works. Okay, cool. So now I have my JSON. Now this JSON is basically going to be my array of users. Okay, and then that's what I want to return. Okay, that's the ideal, right? That's kind of like what we're hoping for. Okay, so now again, here's my little example here. So now if I say instance dot users, notice that here it's marked as a method. Okay, now I can say dot, and notice that now I have my all. So this is basically going to give me all the users, and this returns a promise. Now right now it says any because I haven't even declared what a user even is. Okay, we're going to do that in a bit, but now this is going to return a promise that I can then chain a then on and grab it, or I can do an await. So let's try this out. So let's test. So what are we running right now? So if I go to home, what is it going to be? Login? Yeah, it's login. All right, so let's go to login real quick. So let's go to the login screen. Okay. Now remember, every time you're going to be doing some kind of, you know, if you're going to do an operation in React and you only want to do it once, use useEffect and don't pass anything into the dependencies list. Okay? For example, I only want to run this fetch once. I'm going to say react.useEffect. Okay, remember, you pass it in a function. It's only going to be called, well, it'll be called as many times as you tell it. So if I do it like this, it's going to run every time this component re-renders. If I give it an empty array like that, it's only going to run once because you didn't give it any dependencies. Okay, if you give it some dependencies, it'll re-render if those dependency values ever change. Okay, so what do I want to do here? Well, here I want to grab my API here. So I'm going to say import the bitter API from, gotta move up one. There's the web APIs, bitter API, and then my bitter API file. If I hover over bitter API, it'll tell you, hey, this is a type of bidder API. Great. So now I can say bidder API dot, now there's my users. Oh shit. And I can say dot all. Oh shit. Okay. So again, we want to do this asynchronously. Now React doesn't like it when you mark effectors as asynchronous. So no bueno, don't do that. However, we can get around that, right, by using an IFI. Remember what an IFI is? An immediately invoked function expression. So that's what we're going to do. Remember, parentheses holds an expression. The expression we're going to feed it is going to be a function. Okay? Then we're just going to invoke that expression that just so happens to be holding a function. And then here we can just mark this expression, which is a function, as asynchronous. And that's it. This is an IFI. It looks complicated, but it's really not. Okay? All right, so now that we can use async, now I can say something like const, and I can say users is equal to bidder API dot users dot all. Now all I have to do is say await. Remember, because all is going to return a promise. If I await it, I'll get what it returns. Right now it's marked as any because I haven't yet defined any typings for what a user is. Okay? So all I want to do now is just say console.log users. Hopefully, fingers crossed everybody, that this works. Okay, so this didn't crash. I didn't see anything explode here, so it might have worked. I see some red. And I'm willing to bet this is going to be a CORS problem. And it's a CORS problem. So it says here, access to fetch at, blah, from origin blah, has been blocked by CORS policy. And everybody's saying, what the heck is CORS? So CORS stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. So CORS allows you to share resources between different websites on browsers, but you have to either A, explicitly have a list of all domains that are allowed to share your resources, okay, or use a wildcard and say anybody is allowed to use it. Or if you don't want to share your resources with anybody, then you don't put a CORS in there at all, okay? So in this case, my backend API, okay, doesn't have anything set for CORS. So the only one that's allowed to use, okay, the only one that's allowed to use my backend API is if my backend was also serving the website, because they would have the same domain, because they would also be living in localhost 5050. But because the host is different, because this one's localhost 3000 and my backend's on localhost 5050, there's a security problem. It's not gonna let you. It's not gonna work. So what we need to do is go to our backend and fix that. Because ideally, we would want our backend to allow anybody to use it. Ideally, we're just trying to build an API, kind of like Facebook or Instagram, where they allow portions of their APIs to be used by developers. That's the scenario here. Okay, so how do we fix this? So do I have it here already installed? I do not. Okay, so we need to kill the backend, and we need to install a middleware for Express. It's going to say npm I, and it's called CORS, cross-origin resource sharing. Okay, cross-origin meaning you're going to be sharing resources from different origins. So localhost 3000 is a different origin from localhost 5050. Okay, so there we go. Now we have it. So now I just have to go into my Express application at the very beginning. So notice how I added here express.json as middleware. So I just need to bring in CORS, require CORS. So I'm just going to bring it in. And then in my app, say app.use CORS, and it's a function, so I just need to call it. So if you just do it this way, it's going to use a wildcard and basically allow anybody to hit this. If you want to have some options and only allow certain origins, see right here, you can do that. You can be like, oh, okay, only origins coming from, localhost 5050 are allowed or something like that. So you can make those restrictions if you want your API to only be used by a handful of websites. So only certain websites. Okay. For example, the websites that you're working on. That's totally valid. Okay. Doing it this way, I think it's a security vulnerability because anybody can access it. Since for developer purposes, it's fine. But in the future, once you have your domain and you're like, okay, my website's going to be hosted on, whatever.com, then you can go into your back and be like, only whatever.com can hit this API. Okay. All right. So we're going to start this again. So we'll restart this. Okay. And then we'll just refresh this. Try it again. And there we go. Notice that now our users, we're getting 3 of them. There's our users. It's an array of users. There you go. We got Jane Doe. We got Kevin Pacheco. We got another Kevin Pacheco. Obviously, the names can be the same, but the emails and usernames have to be different. Now, remember when I told you that sending back the password, just doing a blind select star in MySQL was a terrible idea because look, we have the password here. That's not good, right? So we'll fix that, but I just wanted to share that. So now we fixed core, so now we can actually talk to our backend. Great. So let's continue. So I'll just delete all of this because we don't need it here. But now we know it works, which is the important part. Now we know it works. Cool. Okay. So in our users API, right, we would like to also define what the heck a user is, right? So let's do our definitions here at the top. So what we can do actually is go into our backend, go into our services, our user service, and the type defs that we already did for specifically just user for now. We can actually just steal it. There. Now we know what a user is. A user is has a user ID, a username, first name, last name, and an email. Okay. Okay, cool. So now we can actually type, oops, we can actually type our all here. So this returns a what? This returns a promise. Okay, because it's async. We tagged it with async, so it's automatically going to return a promise. So what we actually care about here is, okay, so what are we returning here? Okay, once the promise gets resolved, what are we returning? Well, we're going to return an array of the user that we just typed up here. Okay, we're going to hit save. Okay. So now just so we can see it over here, right? In our instance, we have instance.users.all. Now you'll notice that promise returns an array of users. Boom. Okay. And that's it. Cool. So there's that one. That was the easy one. All right, let's do another one. So we want to do async get, and then user, we'll call it user ID. Okay. I want to show you a distinction between like how you and your front end, you might call a variable something like user ID, but then the back end is expecting it to be called something else. So how do we fix those kinds of situations? Well, the first answer would be like, well, just name it the same thing, right? Why you got to be different, right? But maybe your boss, your company is like, hey, for the front end, variables have to be labeled this way or something like that. Whatever it is. It's like, okay, fine. So we got to fix this. Okay, so ideally, what should this return? Okay, it's asynchronous, so it's automatically going to return a promise. Okay, there's no way around it, right? You mark this method as asynchronous, it's going to return a promise. That's what async does. Automatically returns a promise. But what's inside of the chevrons is going to determine, okay, so what's the actual type that when it gets resolved is what you're going to get. So in this case, we're going to get a user. Okay. Okay, cool. We're going to get it by their user ID. So let's set up the fetch for that. So const response await fetch Okay, I'm gonna use my backtick so I can do some injection here. This dot host slash users, okay, slash, right? This is different now. Remember here, when we just did slash users, it was to get all the users. But now if I say under the users, I'm looking for a very specific user. I'm looking for this user right here. See that? Because that's how we built it over here. If you go to our backend, under our routes, we go to users. If you want to get a specific user, remember, this slash in this route, they're all going to be prefixed with slash users. They're all slash users. Okay. And I can prove that to you because if we go all the way down here, notice that the path is going to be slash users. So all of these routes right here, they're all prefixed with slash users. But if I want to get a very specific user, I need to also provide it a user ID. Okay. And there you go. This is the user ID. Basically, I'm saying I want to get this specific user if they exist. Okay, cool. And that's it. That's it for that one. So hopefully we can get the JSON back. And hopefully we can just return. Again, this is actually incorrect because of the way we built our backend. But I want to show you what happens. Okay, so let me open up the backend here. So let me go into MySQL. Okay, so we have user ID 6, 7, and 15 are the only ones that are valid. Okay. So let's go back to this. So yeah, let's go back to login, I guess. We'll use the login as our testing ground. So we're going to use React. Use effect again. So we're just doing it here in the login just to test. This is just for testing. There's nothing else to do with anything. Okay, so we're gonna do our iffy again. Okay. So we're gonna get a hopefully we get a specific user. So we're gonna say await the I gotta bring it in. API. We're going to fix this because I don't like the way this is looking. How it looks like that. We're gonna fix it. Okay. Oops. Users get. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Why does it look like that? Did I miss something up here? Oh, that's the parameter. This should be the return. Returns. The parameter should be typed to be a number, and that's the user ID. There we go. So if you hover over get, param user ID should be a number, and then the promise, we're going to return a promise because it's asynchronous. So by default, you're automatically returning a promise. But what are you going to return after you resolve? A user. Cool. So what are we trying to get here? We want to get, let's do a valid one. Remember, based off our backend, 6, 7, and 15 are valid. So we're going to use 7. And then let's see if we get that user back. Let's see, what does it look like? Go to our console. I didn't see an error. Okay, cool. So let me refresh this. There we go. So notice that we got just a single user, and it's with user ID 7. Great. We have 7, and it has all the information from the user name, first name, last name, email, and their password. Again, remember I told you this was dumb, but it's fine. So what happens if we give them like 70? We know that this number or this user ID doesn't exist. Is this going to explode? And save. And it kind of does, but it kind of doesn't. Now remember, we're going to get a bad request here because what? Well, that user doesn't exist. And notice our code is coming in here. Beautiful. This is our response. So it didn't crash because our backend handled that situation in the case that you gave it a bad, user. So we got 1010, okay, code 1010, message user with ID 70 does not exist. Okay, cool. What was the problem though? I was expecting to get a user, but instead I got this error. You see the problem? So if I feed it the correct data, I get a user. But if I feed it the incorrect data, I get an error. So am I guaranteed to get a user from this call? The answer is no. You're not guaranteed because our backend will also send you an error message. That error message, however, is going to be, it's unified. Okay, it's unified. So we know the shape of the error. Okay, that's why we went through that entire trouble. So now we need to fix our API here to also be able to handle situations where the error message may come into play. So how do we fix that? Well, what does our backend actually respond with? You know, when we built our service did what? We had a result. And sometimes we got the payload, which is the correct thing, and then sometimes we got the error. So if the error was defined, we got an error. But if it wasn't defined, that was good. We could send the payload over. We forward the payload. So what we're going to do is, that's a very good strategy, in my opinion. So we're just going to do the same thing. Okay. So under our web APIs, we're going to create a file called result.js. And the beautiful thing is we can basically steal it from our backend. So under services, we had this result.js. And we can literally steal this whole thing. This won't work for us because we're using ES6 imports. But we can steal all of this. This is all valid stuff right here. So we're going to just steal it. And we're just going to paste it. Now we have two things that's possible, right, to export here. Right, we have two things. So because of that, we're going to say, we're going to tag this as export, and we're going to tag this one as export. Notice that there's no export default. Okay, it's just this. We're going to export these individually. Okay, so now in our users API, we want to use that. Okay, so we're going to say import from, to say something here. I'm just going to put an object in there because we're going to bring it in. So there's a result. Okay. Now in here, because I used export, I have to use the curly braces because more than one thing got exported. So now you have to use the curly braces, and then you can use destructuring. So I want to get the result out. This is the one I care about, is result. Okay. So because there's a chance that this could, it's possible that whoever uses the API could give us bad data, like maybe the user doesn't exist anymore, so we get that error message. We want to ensure that, we have, that under control. So what is the promise actually? So what is this going to actually return? So if you say return user, you're guaranteed that you're going to get to a user object. But I just told you that the JSON that the backend is going to send us is not guaranteed to be a user. Sometimes it can be an error. So what we actually want to do is have the promise actually return a result. So what's the ideal payload type to be sent back? That's a user. Okay, so we get that. So how do we know if we got an error? Well, before we try and get the JSON out, let's look at the response object. We say if response dot, and there is this OK. There's a Boolean on it called OK. So what does OK mean? If you get any values in the 200s, okay, that's okay. That's good. That's fine. Okay. If you get 400 or 500, okay, that's not okay. That's bad. Okay. Something went wrong. So the easiest way to know if you got the correct response back, the thing that you're expecting is just as okay. Okay, cool. So here we can just say return new result. The first thing is our payload, which is going to be our user. Now our user is still stuck inside of the response as JSON. So you could either do it in here. You can say await response.json like that, or to make it more legible, you go over here, you say const user is equal to await response JSON. Before I just called it JSON, now I'm just going to call it user. Again, you can call it whatever you want. Call it tuna or banana. It doesn't matter. It's what it represents. If you hover over this, it's not like you can get a user anyway, right? Although we know that if everything went okay, you should get a user back. So you could also, if you wanted to, you could type it, force it to be a user. So now if you hover over user, it's a type of user. So you can force that. Okay. Now here I'm just going to pass it in. There's a user. And then the error object, you can just pass null because we didn't get an error. Okay. However, okay, you could either use an else, since we're already returning here, we don't need another one. In the chance that something went wrong, we're still going to return a result, except that we have no payload. That's null. We didn't get a user back. Instead, we got an error. Where's the error? The error is inside of our JSON because our backend is sending us the error as JSON. Okay? So what we can do here is, we can say await response.json. Okay, or to make it more legible, we can say const error is equal to await response.json, and then you can pass the error here. Or, right, big brain move, you could be like, hey, we're calling the same thing twice. Yeah, because it makes no difference, right? JSON is JSON, right? There's, right? You know, when you're talking about the web, everything is a string and it has to get parsed out into a JavaScript object. Okay, so then the thing is, okay, then who gives a shit, right? This makes no sense, right? None of this makes any sense now. So what you could do now is you could do something like this. Just remove it all. Okay. Just say const JSON is equal to await response.json, and then you just pass it in. JSON. Because it's not going to matter, right? It's not going to matter. Because both, remember, the result is in here. The thing is, which one is it? Is it the user or is it the error? Well, the only way to know is, that's why our backend sent back those status codes, is with the status code. So as long as it's okay, we know we got the user, so we can pass the JSON over here. And although this result looks like it's sending back any, because we force type this get to say, hey, you're going to get a user if everything went well, else, remember, result is going to give you an error back. Okay? So that's what the result does. Now, we did that before. You can see here the payload. We're going to get a payload, which is a T, which is a template. So it could be anything. It could be a user, it could be an array, it could be whatever. That's the whole point of using templates. It's a generic. What's the payload going to be? I don't know, and I don't really care. I just know that, all I know is that if everything went well, you should get this payload back. Something went wrong, you should get a type of error, like throw me an error in here. And the error, all I'm doing is I'm structuring and saying that, okay, an error should have a message, that's a type of string, and a code, that's a type of number. And that's all I care about. Okay, you can inherit from, you can extend IR and add extra properties if you want to. That's totally fine. You can do that. But for our situation, just having a message in the code is good enough. In fact, our backend is only going to send that. Okay, so now that our users, our get user has been updated. When we go to login now, if we hover over user, user is a result now. It's not an actual user. So what we can do now is we can destructure. Either we get the payload or we get the error. See that? This looks very much like our backend again, which is good because, we have some, some of this logic is coming in. So now you can just say, okay, if there's an error, console.error, we'll do the error right there. All right. Else console.log payload. Okay. So now we know now we will know if 70 user ID with 70 exists or not. Hit save, go back. Okay, so let me kill that and refresh it. Okay, so you're gonna get a red. So notice that here the error message is in red, and that's because I said console.error. That's why it's red. Okay, so if I put it back to 7, I hit save, you'll notice that we get the user ID now, right? And everything's fine. We get the user, and it's fine. It's totally fine, right? Because that user actually exists. So now we have a way with our API, our web API that we built here for our front end. We now have a way to know if something succeeded or not, based off how the backend is sending us information. Because remember, our backend is going to either send us the payload that we're looking for, or it's going to send us an error message. The error message also is a JSON, but it has a very specific shape. It's going to have a code for an error code, and it's going to have a message saying what the error was, like the user doesn't exist, or you couldn't create the user because there's a duplicate, right? You use the same email. The email already exists, or the username already exists, or whatever. Okay, so how much time do I have left? Oh, shit. Okay. All right, so that's how you get a user. Cool. So we've so far implemented two things. Now, getting all the users could also throw an error. It could also throw an error. So there is no guarantee. See here, by you putting this right here in the promise, you're basically telling me, I guarantee you're going to get an array of user. But our backend could also throw an error, right? Something could go wrong. I don't know. If that's the situation, then we need to be responsible and say, okay, I cannot guarantee you that you're going to get a user. However, I guarantee you that you're going to get a result. Now, the result will give you an array of user if it succeeds. If it doesn't succeed, well, you're going to get an error. And so here we just do the same thing. If response.ok, we return new result. The JSON is going to be in the payload. Error is going to be null. Else, we return, a new result, null on the payload, but we return the error, which is inside of that JSON. See? Now, the next thing you might be saying is, Kevin, it looks like you're writing the same thing over and over and over again. And I would say, I am, right? So we'll fix that. We'll fix it, but for now, let's overlook it a little bit. Okay. Cool. All right, so what's next? So let's go back to our routes, go back to users. Let me close this. Okay, so we have getting, posting. Oh, let's create a new user. So, okay, so let's create a new user. We're gonna mark this as create. Now create what? Well, you need to give me some information, right, about the user. And we already have a term for that. Remember I gave it to you? It's called a DTO. Do you guys remember what a DTO stands for? Type it in the chat if you remember what a DTO stands for. I promise you that if you try and get a job as a backend developer, they're going to ask you, do you know what a DTO is? I'm willing to put money that they're going to ask you, what's a DTO? So our DTO has been defined in our service. So under user service, here's our DTO. Okay, so we're going to go to our here, and then we're just going to define that right there. User DTO. Do you guys remember what it is? Nobody's typed it, so I'm going to give you the answer. Data transfer object. If you want to know more information about what a data transfer object is, I recommend you Google it and do some research. Okay, I kind of already went over it, but it's basically just a subset of a data object. Direct transmission operation? No, close. It has to deal with transmission, but it has to deal with the transmission of data. All right, so we're going to call this user DTO. Okay, now let's type it with JSDoc. So now we have here, this is going to be a type of user DTO. And our method is going to return, because it's async, it's going to automatically return a promise. But what are we going to return? Now, remember, we're good developers. And I told you, if you put something in this promise, you're guaranteeing that that thing is going to be returned. But because of the way our backend works, you either get the payload that you want or you get an error message. Or an error object, excuse me. So the only thing I can put in this promise and guarantee you, right? This is the promise. See, that's why it's called a promise, because I promise I'm going to give you this thing. So all I can say is, all right, I promise you I'm going to give you a result. And the result is going to contain, in this case, a user. Because when you create the user, when you do the request to create a user, hopefully you get a user back. And the user that you get back is going to be what the user now looks like as a resource in the backend. That's going to be like with the user ID and all kinds of stuff. Okay. So we got to do another fetch. So response equals await fetch. So we're going to use the string literals, the backticks, so I can do some injection. Post. I'm going to put it in our backend. You post onto the users. Now, here's the thing, though. Up to now, I haven't had to specify the HTTP method in which I'm doing these fetches in. But if we look at our backend, if we want to create a user, we have to post on slash, right? In this case, it's slash users. Remember, these are all prefixed with slash users. So I need to do a post. So how do I do a post here? Okay, so I'm gonna move these around to make it a little bit easier to read. So the second option is this request information you can do. And there's a method right there, method. And here I'm just gonna say post. I'm gonna do a post. And then there's a body. So what's the body going to be? The body is going to be this JSON.stringify the user DTO. Just pass that along. But now we need to change our headers. Okay. So here's our headers. It's going to be an object. And then we're going to send how do we do this? This is the part I always forget. Okay. Let me look this up. So post, I don't remember if it's an array. You have to pass it an array, or is it okay with just, okay, so it is okay with just the head. Okay, that's what I thought. Okay. Okay. For some reason, these were popping up. So remember, it's a content type. We need to tell it, hey, we're going to send you application/JSON. That's the body, right? That's the body. This body is going to be in a JSON format. So content-type application/JSON. The casing here actually doesn't matter. If you want to be more consistent, I suggest you lowercase everything. Okay, the hyphen is part of, that's what the header is called. That's part of the header label, is content hyphen type. Okay. Okay, cool. So now that we have this, I usually like to put the headers above, like that. Okay. Keep my sanity a little bit. Okay, cool. So now we're going to do this fetch as a post, meaning we're going to send information, okay, to this, endpoint. We're telling the server, whoever's going to get the request, hey, I need you to interpret the body as JSON, and here's the body. Okay, cool. So now, if everything went okay, say if response.okay, okay, we're going to get something. So here we're going to say const JSON. Again, the backend, the way we built it, only is going to respond in JSON. Okay. The thing is, okay, did everything go okay? That's the question. Did everything go okay? So now we're going to say return. So if everything went okay, we're going to say, okay, new result, give them the payload, which is the JSON, error, nothing. Else, okay, since we're returning in the if statement, we don't need to type out an else. Return new result, nothing on the payload because it errored out, but we do have an error, and that error is inside of our JSON. See, because the backend is going to respond in the JSON body with the error or the payload. Okay, so we're using the body to return both. So we're distinguishing between them by checking if the response was okay or not. Okay, now we can create a user. So let's set that up with our sign up. Let's see if we can do this. Okay. So let's go to our login here. Let's remove all this. Let's remove this as well. Okay, let's go to sign up now. Yeah, clear that. Click on sign up here. So now we're in the sign up page. So now we got to update this. So when we click on this button, sign up, right? So the sign up button. So when we click on that button, we want to do the sign up, right? That's what we're trying to do here. Okay. Okay. How much time do I have left? Okay. I think we're good. All right. So the thing is, I need a reference to every single one of these things. I need a reference to them. So now I got to make a reference for first name, last name, username, email, and password. So I'm going to do this manually because I have my API. Okay. So I need to do a const. I'm going to call it input, and then I can say f name ref is equal to React.use ref. Okay, so in React, if you want to get access to any of your components directly, you have to use the ref. So in here in this input, I'm going to just type in ref is equal to, and we use the curly braces, right? And then you just type in your ref. Now we get a connection. By doing this, we establish a connection. So in the JavaScript, I can actually now access this stuff. So we're going to do this for every single one. So there's the last name. We also have a username. We have a email. And then we have a password. Okay, cool. Now we just gotta add them to each one of these. So I'm gonna use my multi-cursors. Okay, and then here, name. Okay, and then in here, username ref. And over here was email. And over here we have password. Sweet. Cool. So I have that. Now, the next thing is, okay, so once I have that, what the hell do I do now, right? Well, we need to create a method that can handle it. So when we click on the button, we actually do the thing that we're trying to do. Okay, so how do we do that? So let's create a function in here. Okay. So you can either do it in here or you can do it over here, right? It really depends what you're trying to do. I recommend that you do it in here because we're gonna have to update a state. Like once they hit sign up, if everything goes well, ideally we would like to then send them over to the login page. You know, I mean we don't have enough time to do it right now, but more ideal you want to do like a little pop-up saying user created or something or whatever. Usually nowadays, once you create an account with some kind of social media, it takes you to another screen which is about like enabling two-factor authentication. Or even before it even does that, it's going to be like, hey, we sent a code to your email. Type in the code here to verify your email address before you can proceed or whatever. And then after that, it then checks, okay, you verified your email. Now we're going to do set up two-factor authentication. That's more complicated setup system. Obviously, we're not going to do that, but those are things to think about. Like, okay, what would be the next step from here? What's like, okay, do you want to authenticate or validate the person's email? The best way to do that, just send them freaking random numbers and then tell them to type it in, and then that's it. And if they match, then the email is valid. That's the easiest thing to do. It doesn't have to be that complicated. Okay, so we're gonna create a create user. It's going to be a function here. Okay, that's going to be executed from this button. So on click, pass create user, just like that. Boom. Jim Bob said, would we need our own SMTP server for that? All right, so if you wanted, so the answer is no, you don't. You could use Google Firebase will do this for you. If you want to do something like that, I believe Google Firebase does that. There's other services that you can pay for that'll do that for you. Now, if you want to go crazy and you want to like handle everything from end to end, then yes, you would have to build your own server, mail server. If you already have your domain, like you bought it from like Namecheap or GoDaddy, then you're almost done, right? The next step is just to set up your email server on, well, your server. So again, this is why I just say, if you're going to be a web developer and you want to control everything from the beginning all the way to the end and everything in between, right? You want to control the whole thing, then just freaking use Linux. Just use Linux. There is I forgot what it's called, monkey something. There's also like open mail. I forget what the other services are. You literally just install it onto your machine. You set it up with your domain. You go to your DNS record. You make sure you update to the correct IP address. It even tells you how to do it, and you're done. That's it. Now you have mail on your server, and the Linux program that you can install on, if you're using like Ubuntu server, will enable mail for you. So you could actually have your own mail. So you could be like Jim at mywebsite.com, and now people can email you at Jim. And so once you have that, well, what can you do? You can send emails to your users, and then you can write I would recommend doing it in Python probably, even though I don't like Python. If you use Python, you can actually set up a listener onto your mail server because it's all just web events, whatever. So you can actually hook up into your mail server using Python and then wait for mails to come in. And what you can do is you can kind of like, you can hijack them using Python and be like, I need to now do a verification. And then Python can like send the email on your behalf. You can set it up to do that. And then when the user does their little trying to enter in the code that Python sent in the email, when Python sent the email, it also has to update the database saying, hey, here's this email is under verification. So when they type in the number into the front end can be like, hey, is this a valid token? And then you can look up in the database and be like, for user ID blah, they should have typed in 1234. They typed in 1234. Hey, it's valid. And now you know that the email, as far as you're concerned, unless they guessed it and they guessed correctly, that email is now verified. That's as far as you know, right? And so the answer is yes, yes, you can. You can if you want to. And there's ways to do it. There's a bunch of free ones out there that you can use with Linux. I just recommend just get used to using Linux, and you'll be fine. There's a bunch of cool stuff you can use with Linux. All right, so let's create the user now. All right, so we have the button. We click the button. The button's going to activate this. I can prove this to you by saying, we will create the user now. Okay. Hit sign up here. So imagine I typed everything and hit sign up. Boom, we will create the user now. So now that I have this linked up, what does this function need to do now? All it needs to do now is call the web API that I just built and try and create the user. So what's really cool is I can also mark this as async, and it should still work too. So let me refresh this just to prove it. Hit sign up. It'll also run. So what's really cool, again, you can't mark the effectors as async, but your on clicks can be marked. Those functions can be marked as async. I don't know why, but whatever. Okay, so now that we have this, all we need to do is bring in our web API. So import bitter API from, we just gotta find it now. Web APIs, bitter API. There's the one. Again, we're going to fix this. Probably fix this on Wednesday, so you don't have to be doing that because this is stupid. All right. Well, let's try and create the user. So const, and then we're going to get something. Remember, we're going to either get the payload, which is going to be the user, or we're going to get an error. So equals await bitter API dot users, which is a method to get the users object, dot create. Now it's like you need to pass in the user DTO. Okay, and that's an object. So I start my object. If I do control space now, hey, look at that. It even tells you what the hell it wants. Sweet. So let's start adding things in one at a time. So let's give it the f name. So the first name is coming from fnameref.current.value. That's it. That's all you need to do. Next, lname. lnameref.current.value. Oh, not that. Next, do the username. Username, it's going to be under the username ref.current.value. Damn it. All right, email, email ref.current.value. Password ref. And then, oh, no, that's password right here. Okay, and then password ref.current.value. Do one more, control space, nothing else is required. Okay, so we sent everything. So that's it. That's all the data we wanted. Okay, so if it works, we're going to get the payload back. Else, we're going to get an error. Now again, right now it's called payload, but remember, you can alias it, meaning you can change the name by doing a colon and then give it a new name, like user. Okay? So the way it works is the backend says, okay, give me the DTO, and if everything succeeds, I'm going to give you a user back. So what the user looks like now in the backend. So what do you not see here? That's the user ID. So the backend will send back the user shape with the user ID, which only the backend can create the user ID. So that's how you know it succeeded for sure. So now we just gotta say, okay, if it's an error, let's console.error, the error. Else, console.log, the user. Not payload, because we aliased it from payload to user. So payload no longer works. You try to say payload, it's not going to work. Notice here it says ABC. It's just guessing because it's seen payload before. Now it's a user. See, user pops up. It's a type of user. Okay. All right, we hit save now. Okay, so let's try it. First name, Kevin. Last name, Pacheco. Username. We'll do polymorphic email, mail@mail.com. .com password 12334. Hit sign up. Hey, look at that. It worked. We got a user with a user ID with all my information. Great. So now if I go back to my backend, here's my oh, and it's all messed up over here. Let me make this smaller. There we go. So this is what it looked like before. It had 6, 7, and 15. Now if I run the same SQL command, select everything from users, there's my new user, 17, with polymorphic now, and then mail@mail.com, password 1234. Great. So we've got a new user. Sweet. So what happens if I were to be dumb and hit sign up again? If I did it twice for some stupid reason? Oh, I get an error. What does the error say? Error, duplicate. Cool. Right? That's the error message you get. Bad request. So right there, bad request, you get duplicate. Sweet. Do you see how this is all working? It's all coming together. All right. Obviously, we don't want to do this, right? Okay, we error out again. Okay, so in the future, show a modal or banner to indicate the error. And then right now, what we're going to do now is, if everything went well, we're going to forward the user to log in. I believe it's use history. Yeah. Okay. Const, call this history is equal to use history. This is coming from React router. So this hook allows us to manipulate the routes. Yeah, exactly. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the movie The Emperor's New Groove. Oh yeah, it's all coming together now. So you see how, you build a backend. It's slow. I understand this is a really long process, but hey, that's full stack development. It's a process. So now we can say history dot. I believe we can say push. That's what I want to say. Actually, I'm gonna double check this. I don't want to give you wrong. React router use history. Push. I think it's push. You can see some examples here on the official thing here. History.push. Yes. Okay, I was right. Okay, so it's history.push. Dot push. We want to go to the login screen. That's where we want to go. Is it login? What's the route? I don't know. I don't remember the route. It's been a while. Oh, so just go home. Okay, go home. So we're gonna push home. That's it. We're gonna go home. All right. So let's try this again. Okay. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my own API. I'm gonna delete the user. Okay, all the information's gone. We'll just create a new user. So we'll create a user called Bob Dylan, username Dylan forever, email Dylan, or I can say bob@dylan.com, password, hit sign up. Hopefully, if it works, right? I hit sign up. It should take me home to the login page. Hey, look at that. All right, so everything's good. So we have a new user. And now all we have to do is type in our username here, which I already forgot what the username was. Oh, it was Dylan forever. Password is password. And hit login. Ah, shucks. We haven't hooked that up yet, right? But hey, we're almost there. Okay. So it's almost looking like a functional website. We're so close. I want to remove that. Okay. So now, one thing that we can do, which I think is a good idea, is wouldn't it have been cool if after you create a user, when you go to the login page, the login page already has the username set up for you? Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that be nice? That would be nice, wouldn't it? I think so. So let's try and do that. So how can we do that? Well, we can store things in the local storage. All we have to do is say set item. What are we going to set? Let's just do the username for now. Okay. What's the value going to be? Well, it just came from the user dot username. Okay, cool. Save. So how do we update in the login? How can we make it so that the username here, if one already exists in the local storage, that we can just populate it in there? So how can we do that? So, so that we look professional, guys. We gotta look professional here. All right. So, you might be thinking, can we use the ref? And I think we can. I want to say we can. Let's try with the ref. The other way is to use something called a state. Let's try with the ref. So we have username ref is equal to React.useRef, not reducer, ref. And then we have the password there. So password ref is equal to React.useRef. Okay. What we're going to do now is we're going to use an effect. We want this to happen the very first time, or anytime it re-renders. If it's the first time that it renders, we want to do something really quick. What we want to do is we want to go into local storage, check to see if there's a username in there, and if there is, we want to update the value of this input field to that thing. So we're going to say username ref.current.value is equal to local storage.getItem username. And then hopefully, if the username is there, we should get what? That username. So we look professional. We want to look professional. So let me refresh this. Cannot set property of undefined. Okay, so yeah, so we want to do here user ref. I believe current. There is a moment in time where this is going to be null until this renders, and once it renders, React is able to link. Oh, I'm sorry, I haven't linked it. So we gotta say ref, and then username ref, and then let me link the password as well. Ref, and then password ref. Okay, that should be fine. Hit refresh, and it is fine. Great. Okay, cool. So let's go to sign up. Let's make a new user. Peter Parker Spider-Man. Spidey at marvel.com. Password. Let's say pizza time. Sign up. Hopefully, if it works, when we hit sign up, it's going to take us to the login page. And then what will the login page have? The username should say Spider-Man. Oh, it worked. Woo! Right? So it's like, okay, everything went well. We know who you are, right? You're Spider-Man. So now you can go over here and then type in your password. So there's one less thing for you to do, and then hit login. This is all part of the user experience. It's all part of the user experience. Okay, so that's how you can use the local storage to store like basic stuff. Now, the username is not that big of a deal. Do not store passwords in local storage. Okay, do not store passwords in cookies. That's what JWTs are for, web tokens. Okay. Cool. So now we have a way to create a user, and then if everything succeeds, it'll send them to home where they can log in, and we have their username. Beautiful. All right, so it's one less step for them to do. You've seen this, right? When you've signed up for Disney Plus or Netflix or any kind of service. Once you put your sign up information, you go to if everything went well, when you go to the login, it usually always auto populates your username here. So we're just trying to simulate that. Okay, so let's try and do a login attempt. So the problem right now is that our backend, we haven't built any kind of API to do like authentication. So we don't have an authentication system here. So the only way to see anything is that we need to look up the user or something like that. So what we need to do is we need to create inside of our users some kind of new route to do authentication. Unfortunately, we're out of time, 7:25. So we'll have to put a pause on that. Does anybody have any questions of anything that I did today? Anybody have any questions? I'm gonna exit out of this. Type in here, get status, yes, okay. Get command, and then John's asking again, where exactly is front-end seeing back-end? Oh, how are they communicating? They're communicating over the web API that we built in the front end. See this web API? We built it here. This is the front end. They're communicating over HTTP, right? That's how their communication. If you're talking about like the protocol, it's HTTP, right? You see here the protocol right there. It's HTTP. That's how they're communicating. So we built this web API in order to establish a communication. That's what this whole thing was. This is how we're talking to our backend, is via fetch, doing these requests. These are just web requests. So that's how they're communicating. Yeah. So let me kill this now. No other questions? Okay, I'm just going to push this to GitHub and you guys can have access to the code. So added bitter API, updated login or sign up to use bitter API to create a user. And now reference local storage to extract a known user. Okay, so if nobody has any questions, there's the code. And I guess that's all she wrote. Hopefully this has been, you know, educational. You've been seeing how now this is all kind of like tying up together. Like we built the back end, so like now how do we hook it up with the front end? Well, the only way to do that is you could do all those fetches inside of your components, but that's not a good idea. The better approach is to build an API, right? Inside of your front end, right? So that you can just do calls, right? This makes it easier to like maintain, you know, in the case that for some reason one of your API stuff changes, it's a lot easier. Like let's say for example, you know, the host name changes. Your backend is now being hosted on, you know, what is it, Google Cloud instead of AWS, for example. Well, if you did all the fetches and login and sign up, you did it all manually, well, now you're screwed because now you got to go to every single file, Find wherever the heck you put, HTTP, AWS, whatever, EC2, whatever. And you're gonna have to modify them to do the Google Cloud endpoint or whatever. That's a problem, right? But if you build a web API like what we did today, then if something changes, your front end doesn't care if you're hosting in some other place. Your front end is already set up. All you have to do is go to the web API, change it there, and it propagates everywhere. It's gonna work just fine. See? So that's like, I would say that's the better approach to doing some of these things. Is remember, you don't want to just be a programmer, right? You want to be a good software engineer. So you need to basically engineer your applications in an intelligent way to make it reusable, sustainable, and maintainable, right? Those are the things. Those are key things that you want to do. Which is why, yes, are we writing more code than is necessary to get something to work? Yes, absolutely. But the way we're building it is structurally sound. We have a really good foundation with our backend. Our front end's pretty good, and now we're just putting it all together, and we will have a solid application by the end of it. Okay. All right. So since nobody has any other questions, I will end it here. If you guys have any problems, hit me up on the Discord. And oh, Jimbo asked, do you think we have time to go back over basic Socket.io implementation for chatting? Not a whole feature, just the basics and how to properly get started? Absolutely, Jim. Just for you. Just for you, we'll do it. Once we get a login page or somewhere where we can actually go in, I will absolutely show you how to build a chat system. And if we have some extra time, we can even add a feature so you can do like video calls. We can do video calls too, using something called you can even look it up if you want to ahead of time. It's called Webrtc. Okay, I already went through all the trouble of figuring out how Webrtc works, so I will save you the trouble and teach you how to build your own Zoom application. Okay, basically it's Zoom. I'll teach you how to build Zoom/Discord. So I'll teach you how to do that using Socket.io and also Webrtc. So I'll teach you how to build all that. All right, so if there's no other questions, then I will end it here. All right, thanks everybody. I'll see you guys on Friday. Bye everyone.